If you struggle with self-love, that's oftentimes because... Hey Soul Surfers, welcome back to the channel. If you are new here and have not yet subscribed, you can do that by clicking that subscribe button. You can also click the notification bell to be notified when new content is posted. And if you like what you see, give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. All right, in today's video, we are talking about why self-love is so hard. When I think back on my life, I think about how easy it has been for me to love everybody else, to give love to people in my family, to partners, to friends, to pretty much everybody else except myself. They even say that we are our own worst critic, which is true, but why is that a truth? Why does that have to be a truth? It doesn't have to be a truth. In fact, it's something that I think society conditions us, to be our own worst critic. That's why when we receive compliments, it's oftentimes hard for us to just say thank you, but we have to criticize ourselves or diminish that compliment somehow. It's essentially become normalized for us to be our own worst critic. So let's get back to self-love. I mean, the self-criticism is a part of that. But why is it so hard to love ourselves? If you struggle with self-love, that's oftentimes you were taught not to love yourself. The things that you saw in your childhood or in society basically said it's normal to not love yourself. It's normal to berate yourself. It is normal to find all of your flaws instead of looking at the beautiful parts of yourself. And actually, every part of you is beautiful. It's more accepting the fact that every part of you is beautiful. And I mean every part, physically and mentally, emotionally, etc. If you do not love yourself or you struggle with self-love, that's because you were taught to behave that way. You were taught that this is a truth. Most of the time, we are learning from our caregivers or our parents as children, and that's the main people that we model ourselves after. That's who we look up to. A lot of times, that's who we end up not wanting to be in the future, but we actually become them anyhow because there's no way really around it unless we actively break a pattern. So if you struggle with self-love, take a look back at your family and look at your parents or caregivers around you. And oftentimes you'll see a pattern that those people that we were modeling ourselves after didn't love themselves either. And they learned that from their parents, and their parents learned that from their parents. So essentially, this lack of self-love is a behavior pattern and conditioning that's passed down generation to generation to generation. And when we get that templating or that conditioning, we run on autopilot with it throughout our lives and just think that that's the way it is supposed to be. So essentially, a lack of self-love did not start with you. It starts down an ancestral line oftentimes. We say things are genetic. What that really means to me is that these are things that are passed down. They're beliefs that are passed down. So, for example, if somebody says, I have a slow metabolism because it's genetic, what that's really saying is that the people in my family are overweight, and so our metabolism is slow, and that's the belief that's passed down. And when we believe that or use that as an excuse, and that becomes our reality. So we are overweight because we believe our metabolism is slow. So really, again, like going back to the lack of self-love, a lack of self-love is a belief that's passed down. It's passed down not only in families, that's typically where it starts, but we also see it in society. Now, the reason I think it's such a big thing in society not to love ourselves is because we now have so many people on this planet, and we are passing down generations of trauma and generations of this belief of lack of self-love. So as people are not breaking the cycle, as this pattern continues and there's not somebody actively breaking that cycle in the family, it will continue to be passed on. And as people are having more kids without really doing the deep dive into this and healing that behavioral pattern, it's just unconsciously being passed down the line until somebody decides to break the pattern. So at a time when our population is so high, it's not surprising to me really that self-love is really a global issue. I really believe that that is our biggest epidemic in this world right now, is a lack of self-love. So essentially in childhood or throughout life, we have experienced things. And when we experience those things, the meaning we give to it is what we take away from the situation and carry out into the world. So if I, for example, got really good grades, but let's say I got all A's and 1 B, and the focus on that from my caregivers was that I got a B and it wasn't good enough despite all of the A's, then how I interpret that and internalize that is what I'm going to take with me as a belief. So for me, in that instance, I may believe that, well, nothing I do is good enough because they're focusing on this flaw. So then I become a perfectionist, or I learn perfectionistic behaviors because focusing on that to me meant I wasn't good enough. It meant that I didn't do enough. I didn't make my parents happy enough. And essentially taking on the responsibility for their happiness. And then also internalizing that because they focused on that, that meant that there was something wrong with me. Somehow, some way. And what happens in the world is that the universe matches us with the things that we believe. So if I learned that or gave that situation that meaning in my life, and I feel I'm not good enough or I don't do enough, the universe is going to keep reinforcing that belief until I change my belief. So it's going to keep showing me situations where I don't feel good enough, where I feel like I failed, where, basically until I learn the lesson, or, well, you can say learn the lesson, but essentially it comes down to changing my belief that I am good enough, that I do enough, that my worth is not attached or tied to this B that I got, and that I have all those A's. So essentially, self-love is so hard because we learned not to love ourselves. If we're modeling ourselves after people who weren't behaving in self-loving ways, and we think that that's the way to live and that's the way we should treat ourselves. There was this saying that I heard a lot as a kid, and that is, do as I say, not as I do. But words really don't have meaning. It's the action, it's the behavior. That's what we're watching. We were watching as kids how our parents are behaving. And that's when we can get mixed messages because they're saying do this, but they're not doing it. So it's a confusing, it's almost like trying to sort out, well, which is right? What's the right thing to do? But we're basically matching energy and we're matching their behaviors. So really the words don't mean quite as much as the action, as that's what we focus on. So again, if our caregivers or the people we were learning most from or modeling after and wanted to be like in life, if they weren't exhibiting self-loving behaviors, then it's a higher likelihood that we were not going to exhibit self-loving behaviors. So essentially, a lack of self-love is a learned behavior. The great thing about this, though, is that we can unlearn this lack of self-love and we can learn to love ourselves. We can change our beliefs about ourselves and know that we are enough, that we are worthy and deserving, that our value is not tied to someone else's happiness or how they perceive us. It's all tied with how we view ourselves. If you struggle with self-love like I have my entire life, I created this 30-day series called 30 Days to Self-Love, and it gives 30 different ways that you can practice self-love in your life. If you are embarking on the self-love journey, be kind, gentle, and caring with yourself, because it's very easy to beat ourselves up if we don't get everything perfect on the first try. We have to remember that we did not learn these behaviors overnight, and we've been living these behaviors, this lack of self-love, for as many years as we've been alive. So those behaviors are not going to change overnight either. But each step that we take, each decision, each time we choose ourselves and make that forward motion, that's a step towards self-love, and we can't take that away from ourselves. Making this move forward to self-love, learning self-love, practicing self-love in your daily life It's going to bring you so much joy and happiness because you're going to realize that your worth, your value is not tied to anything externally. We can free ourselves from our prison of self-hatred. And in fact, we're the only ones that can do that. There's nobody outside of us, no thing outside of us that can love us enough to love ourselves. We have to love ourselves first, know that we are lovable just as we are, and then we will be able to feel emotionally fulfilled. We cannot get that anywhere or from anybody or from anything outside of ourselves. All right, soul surfers, if you have been conditioned to not love yourself and to live in this belief that lacking self-love is the way to live, and you're ready to break that pattern, go ahead and get started by checking out this 30 Days to Self-Love series. Again, this is going to be a pivotal moment for you in your life. Things are going to change. It might not feel so great in the moment, and it might be a scary journey to start embarking on, but as you go along and as you learn to navigate and master yourself and your emotions and loving yourself, you're going to see that it is all so worth it for you in the end. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you liked what you saw in this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and share it with your friends. Otherwise, I will see you in the next video.